Hello and welcome to another edition of the Tour Junkies DP World Tour show. I'm your host Mark Hill, and this week we're bringing you the Ras al Khaimah Championship from Al Khaimah Golf Club. A little bit of housekeeping before I get underway here. So DB and Pat, they've dropped their betting picks and DFS show for the week on the A&T Pebble Beach Pro-Am. While the kid Garrett Simmons, he's also dropped his show for the Panama Championship on the Corn Ferry Tour. And listen, both shows are riding hot at the minute. DP World Tour shows letting us down a little bit, but listen, these guys, 250 to 1 winner on Hudson Swafford, 90 to 1 Aske Batia. Then our boy DB takes down Luke List last week at 75 to 1. Take that straight to the pay window to get a nice little payout. Yeah, these guys are hot at the minute. Via raucous wedding reception, I have to add, for DB based on some of the Twitter videos that surfaced. But yeah, they're all happy. I'm going to try and keep this show on the road and get some DP World Tour winner tickets as well. We did land our best bet last week with Thomas Peters, top Belgian. He made it through the cut without much of a sweat. The other two lads, Nicholas Colsarts and Thomas Dietrich, they both missed the cut. So that was a good return for us on that side of it, on the best bets. But yeah, the DFS side of it and the outright bets. Listen, all 5 selections made it through the cut. That's the first thing you've got to ask for. But there wasn't any equity up the top in the top 5, top 10. Victor Hovland went on to win the tournament, had very little exposure to him. Plenty of 6-6 lineups, but Richard Bland as well in second, didn't have any exposure there. So, yeah, we're knocking on the door in terms of getting over the line in the made cuts department, but not quite getting there to the top of the board. To be honest, would handicap it pretty much the same way. If I go back to the tournament again this time next year and have a look again, I think handicap-wise, I was happy enough. I did have Hovland on a short list. Price-wise, couldn't get there. But it's one of those ones that we keep going, we plug on and keep to our processes and hope that we get the returns. So let's start February with a win, fingers crossed, in the Middle East. Caveat as well is that obviously the Saudi International Tournament is going on this week. That's part of the Asian Tour. Yes, higher profile, but at the stage now where DraftKings haven't even priced up that for DFS purposes. So we're going to stick solely with the Ras al Khaimah Championship. You know, it's one for the golf purists. It's a drop in class, certainly 75% in terms of prize money this week compared to what was on offer in the previous 2 weeks in the Rolex Series events. So it's definitely one for the golf purists. But we'll put this show on the road and see how we go. So into the course breakdown there, we are at Al Khaimah Golf Club for our 3rd consecutive week in the United Arab Emirates and back-to-back tournaments at this particular venue. So next week was due to be the Qatar Masters. That's been postponed for COVID reasons. So Ras al Khaimah as a venue and Al Khaimah Golf Course are stepping up to the plate for the next 2 weeks. So a lot of the handicapping that goes in this week, we'll obviously get a look at how the guys perform on this field and on this course, somewhere they haven't played before for the most part. We do have some Challenge Tour history to draw upon, but this is the first time we're going to see it at European Tour or DP World Tour level, so that's something that we're going to dig deeper on. Course setup for the week is a par 72, 7,325 yards. It's a Peter Harradine designed course. As I touched upon, it's a new venue for the DP World Tour. We have seen it, though, on 3 occasions on the Challenge Tour. So 2016, 2017, 2018. Your number of Challenge Tour graduates did get a look then. And a number of those are teeing up this week on Thursday morning. So there will be some course experience to draw upon. And I guess some course figures to draw upon as well. The Challenge Tour don't typically record stats, so that is a negative. But what I have done is deep dived on how the top 5 performers or top 10 in the field from those tournaments have gone on and progressed and how they were performing generally around the sort of years where they were in the mix. So there is something to draw upon there, whilst we don't have the actual stats from the tournament themselves. It's another coastal style desert track, passable and greens again, water in play on a number of the holes as well. We've seen passable and greens 2 weeks ago at the Abu Dhabi Championships. That's something that I've definitely put a thought into and a weight into. 2 former winners here at Challenge Tour level. We have Jordan Smith in 2016 is in this field with a score of 20 under par, and Adri Arnhuis as well in 2018 at 17 under. Weather for the week looks fairly calm. Typically, we will see the breeze pick up in the afternoons when we're in the Middle East, especially coast to the coast while we are here. One thing I picked up just I probably didn't factor it in too much whenever I was looking at the first 2 weeks is that the temperatures are particularly lower earlier in the day. So you do get the fairly mild conditions, but you get the dew on the grass, you get the certainly colder conditions overall, and the ball flight isn't going to travel as far. That's something I've started to factor in a little bit more, and I put a bit more weight into in terms of the overall look. You do get breezes picking up in the afternoon, which offsets that a little bit. But in terms of the heat picking up, it does allow for further ball flight. I think I heard around 15% difference overall in the numbers. So it's got to be something I have to sort of factor into any model I'm putting together and looking at in a deeper dive. So something I've definitely looked at this week around. Sunday is supposed to be the strongest winds of the 4 days, so your guys get through the cut. Maybe wind picks up a little bit in the afternoons, generally speaking, and then on Sunday we're going to see a little bit of a windy challenge, but nothing to the extent that we've seen at Abu Dhabi 2 weeks ago, where the field was decimated on the Friday, in particular, where we're getting 30-mile-an-hour gusts. What have I looked at in terms of key stats then? So does look to be a premium on off the tee and driving distance this week. Did the analysis of the top 5 and top 10 from the Challenge Tour and where their particular strengths and weaknesses lied during that run in 2016, 2017, 2018. Off the tee game tended to be an important element to the all-round top 10 makeup and certainly distance. A couple of player quotes from those tournaments as well. So Anton Rosner saying you need to hit it long and straight. Francesco Laporta saying you need to play well off the tee. It makes it a lot easier around here. Joel Statler was in the field as well. He said length off the tee is quite an advantage for the week ahead. So a couple of quotes put together. I have to admit where my sources come from on that. So we have a lot of guys that handicap the European Tour and do an extremely good job. Those quotes were up on Golf Betting Club. If you haven't checked them out, definitely worth a look. Even if you're not paying for the pick service side of things, their actual profiles and breakdowns of golfers is well worth a look if you're trying to dig a bit deeper on some DP World Tour guys, and also their summaries going into the week of what they're looking for in terms of the course and strengths and weaknesses. So it's another one to factor in there with the likes of Data Golf or Tour Tips or Golf Betting Systems is another one. So there is plenty of resources, or I wouldn't say plenty of resources, but the resources are building, will we say, that we can draw upon to try and get some DP World data pulled together and some informative and informational stuff that's out there. Recent form, naturally, I've looked at that this week. I want guys who are coming in with competitive rounds under their belt short term and have some green shoots in their underlying numbers long term as well. They've blown off the dust post Christmas, got a round or got a tournament or two under their belts in these first 2 weeks in the Middle East prior to this one. I can't entirely rule out a first-time winner, but I am looking at someone who's had top 10 form in their last 10 outings. That did help whittle down the field. And then, as I touched upon, the Paspalum Greens element as well. It just plays a little bit different to your Bent or Bermuda that we would see on a lot of the courses on the DP World Tour. So definitely having to look that in. And finally, greens and regulation as well, to an extent, will play a factor. I did weighted very heavily last week, and if we looked at the top 10 greens and reg numbers for the top 10 finishers last week was pretty significant. It's something, again, I think will play into this. I have read that the greens are a little bit smaller than the previous 2 tournaments we've just seen. But overall, a quite invitive track, fairly, yes, exposed, but flat, not particularly rough penal, water in play on a few holes, but overall there's an all-round golfer there that can do well. Distance off the tee an advantage, and something that we're definitely going to look at. So let's have a quick look at the top of the board. I'm going to have a little sip of my podcast juice, which is just a straight up Jack Daniels and Coke this week. Not going too overboard or too fancy with it. It's been a long day, a lot of coffees, a lot of meetings, a lot of business, but yeah, and enjoy this to wind down the end of my day, and then before getting up again for an 8 a.m. work call in the morning, the kids and everything else. So yeah, I will sip on my Jack Daniels and Coke before getting into the top of the betting board. So top of the betting board this week, we're headlined by Bernd Wiesberger at 10-1. Jordan Smith comes in at 20-1. Adrian Meronk at 22-1. Roman Langasque at 22-1. Robert McIntyre 25-1. And Richard Bland at 25-1. So in terms of the top of the betting board then, Bernd Wiesberger comes in as 10-1 favourite. I did shortlist Bernd Wiesberger this week. Very little difference, though, in my model between Wiesberger and a couple of the guys just slightly longer in terms of price. You're getting double the price on Smith and the likes of Meronk. So purely on a stats play side of things, obviously he's the cream of the crop in terms of the overall field. He's one of the stronger guys here with no one inside the world's top 50, but we're talking about a Ryder Cup player here and someone with plenty of experience and has shown glimpses of form. He does justify the favoritism at the top of the board at 10-1. I reckon he'll go close. It's just whether he can pull the putter together across 4 rounds to remain in contention down the stretch. Smith and Meronk, I'm going to touch upon them in the betting portion, so I'll hold fire on my comments on them. Romain Langas, then 22-1. Didn't mind Langas this week. Positive off the tee player long term, which is an obvious bonus round here based on the stats that we've dug into. And he did game with a putter in Abu Dhabi 2 weeks ago as well on the Paspalum surface, so that's something to keep in mind. Now, 2 good showings, succession, back-to-back top 20s in a seasonal reappearance, dropped down in class, so he's obviously going to be a popular selection this week for a lot of guys. They had just 1 top 10, though, in the whole of 2021. That was at the Magical Kenya Open. Certainly eye-catcher enough in terms of the short-term form over the last couple of weeks, but it's enough to keep me off the outright side of things that the win equity may not be there with Roman Langask at 22-1 on DraftKings Sportsbook. Yeah, I'm happy enough to stay clear, but I definitely could see him having a solid week overall, being in contention, but I don't see the win equity there. Where do we start with Robert McIntyre? I couldn't touch Bobby Mack with a 10-foot barge pole. Never mind trust him to sink a 10-foot putt down the stretch. It's one of those ones, we look at him long term, we know there's a golfer there with win equity, but short term, stretching back to that Corn Ferry Tour final disappointment, he just hasn't been able to put it around and get his game to go. I just can't take him at a short price whenever we see the likes of Smith, Meronk, Langask all coming out well in 2022 so far, all at similar price points. So at 25-1, I'm going to swerve Robert McIntyre. Did lose over a stroke in putting on the Paspalum at Abu Dhabi 2 weeks ago as well. Long-term metrics, they would appeal. Short-term eye test and metrics and numbers, can't get there at all with Bobby Mack, unfortunately. But I'm hoping it's a long season and he can turn it around and we will have opportunities in the future to get on him, but it continues to be a fade for now. Richard Bland then, 25-1. Stellar effort last week. And whilst he has put back-to-back challenges together, last season when he won the British Masters, he followed that up with a T3 at the Maiden Himmerland, but they had a week's rest in between, getting on a little bit and long on the tooth, what we say age-wise, and going those successive weeks, if you like, isn't necessarily Blandy's strength. I think when he has done well, it's literally been off a break of a week or so in between where he gets a chance to reset. Obviously going into a playoff last week, lost to Hovland in that regard. Not convinced he can then go on and win this time around. He's maintained same age at the top of the leaderboard. Factored in his lack of length, though, general off the tee numbers, I'm just not going to get to him. Didn't get to him last week for the same reasons. That backfired, but yeah, I just can't see him putting it together again this time around to be up there on the final day competing. So, I've given a bit of a brief summary there of the top of the betting board, so I need to get into who I'm actually landing on this week. And my first selection at 20-1 is Jordan Smith. So when I looked at the Challenge Tour side of things, I said to myself, don't get sucked in. Don't get sucked in. Do not start waiting in on guys that have the course experience here at Challenge Tour level. Never mind the win equity, which Jordan Smith did in 2016. But I had to couple it with the recent form. And I know we are playing a premium at 20-1 when you take in the little bit of course history, which has obviously performed well, and you take in the recent form side of things. But at 20-1, I just can't get away from him. He's double the price of Bernd Wiesberger and had very little to separate the two in the model side of things. So it is a guy in form. He graded out second in my accuracy model, which is part of the factor that I've pulled in. And when I say accuracy, that's looking at fairways gained coupled with the greens and regulation numbers. So a bit of a blend of the two. More weight put towards the greens and regulation over the fairways gained. But also did well with a putter in Abu Dhabi on the Paspalum. T9 last week in Dubai. T12 on a seasonal reappearance. Clearly likes it here in the Middle East in general with the strong location for him. In terms of the field itself, he had the strongest long-term off the tee numbers. Decent length off the tee in general, which is a positive. So the recent form, the win equity, the Middle East form, all-round game trending in the right direction. Smith gets my card underway at 20-1. Next up is Adrian Meronk. And like Smith, Meronk has previous form here. He's a golfer I've put up on a couple of occasions already since launching the DP World Tour show for the Tour Junkies. Knocking on the door at T8 at the Aviv Dubai Championship, T2 at the Italian Open, T4 finished last week. It's only a matter of time before Meronk gets over the line and gets that maiden European Tour victory, or DP World Tour. I have to keep correcting myself on that one. All round then, I guess his approach play is a bit of a concern, but that aspect as well is trending in the right direction. He was 8th in the field last week for approach, and his around the green numbers were the ones that were lacking. So this does turn into a birdie fest as well. He does have the ability to shoot low, shot a 63 in round 3 at the Dubai Championship in the latter part of 2021. As touched upon previously, good showing at this track with a second place finish in 2017. Say it's only a matter of time before this pole gets the win under his belt at this level. He's going to be highly motivated to get over the line in this strength of field come Sunday afternoon. So my second selection is Adrian Meronk at 22-1. My next selection is Padraig Harrington at 50-1. Now, coming into the year, I didn't think I would be putting Padraig Harrington up as an outright selection. When I opened the course breakdown as well, I said off the tee is an important number that I'm factoring in this week. And whilst that and putting wouldn't be the Irishman's long-term strength, it's certainly not a weakness on his first two starts in 2022. Data Golf have his adjusted strokes gained, which takes in the weight of the field, if you like, true strokes gained data as they call it, at plus 0.71 strokes off the tee for Harrington through the opening 2 weeks. And his all-round game is pretty solid at the minute, with back-to-back top 20s in the Middle East since we got here. So the former Ryder Cup captain is definitely showing signs at the age of 50 that he's not quite over the hill just yet. And can I sit here and say I'm going to rule out another win before he rounds out his career and goes off into the sunset on the Champions Tour? To be honest, I really can't rule it out. And I think if any kind of tournament and strength of field side of things, where he's comfortable in the Middle East and he's looking well overall, his all-round game is trending fairly well. Another thing we'll look at as well is when I'm digging into the numbers and you get over the hump, if you like, of a certain age group, which, Padraig is heading that way. He's 50 years of age now. You do see a huge drop-off in driving distance and the off-the-tee numbers, generally speaking. He hasn't really negated that fact too much. It hasn't fallen away too much in his all-round game. So he still has a bit of length to it to be competitive around here. He wasn't one of the ones that I knocked out very early in my modeling stage and my filters this week. He was still there. So yeah, there's plenty to like, and I would love to see the fairy tale finish on Sunday that my 50-1 selection at Ras al Khaimah gets over the line and the Padraig Harrington gets another Pro Tour victory win. So at 50-1, my third selection is Padraig Harrington. My next two guys then are both Challenge Tour graduates, and I'm going to kick off with Julien Brun. So he's also at 50-1. GIR looks to be an important metric this week. He graded out 5th in the field at Abu Dhabi 2 weeks ago, hitting over 80% of greens in regulation. So that's definitely a positive for him. His relative distance off the tee to compete here is not the longest, but he certainly has the relative distance, and showed in his previous appearance at the Joburg Open prior to opening up the 2022 year. So the Joburg Open was the one in South Africa where we got 2 rounds under our belt. We crowned a champion, and then all hell broke loose over the Omicron variant. The tournament was called to a halt. But he did start very well there. T5 finish in the end, technically. And really, overall, his around the green and scrambling numbers are generally improving, so something to be looking at. Driving accuracy is probably a bit of a concern with Julien Brun, but from everything I read this week, the rough isn't particularly penal, so I don't think that's going to come into factor too much for him. And if he is hitting greens in reg, he's going to get plenty of looks if the approach game is on its best footing, I guess. Did gain well with a putter on the Paspalum. Had the week off to regroup as well. So a lot of these guys have gone back-to-back which to an extent helps you blow off the dust. But also, there's a case to be made that, if we're playing in Abu Dhabi and then had a nice week off to try and refocus, regroup, work on some of those aspects, and then reappear here at the Ras al Khaimah Championship, that might be a little bit of an advantage for Brun. So for me, plenty of upside. Extremely competitive coming down the stretch on the Challenge Tour as well. So I mentioned he's a Challenge Tour graduate. In that regard, T2 in the grand final for the Challenge Tour, and also had a win at the Imported Challenge in Girona in Spain. So plenty of upside. Be nice to see him go close here. I think he's shown overall improvement across 2021 from start to finish. Start of 2022 with some green shoots, if you like, and I'm happy to have Julien Brun on my card at 50-1. And again, on the screen there, if you are watching in terms of the YouTube side of things rather than on the podcast form or listening back in that regard, yeah, I am trying to put up the best prices. So all the prices I'm talking about at the moment are DraftKings Sportsbook prices, but I have put up best prices there. So when we go back to Jordan Smith, put him up at 20-1 instead of DK, 24-1 best price out there at the moment on Bet Chris. Adrian Meronk, best price 25-1 with Bet 365. Podrick Harrington, best price 60-1 with Bet 365. Julien Brun, then he's best price, see 55-1s out there with Bet MGM and Bet 365 as well. So whilst I am putting up that 50-1 line shop, do what you can and pick up other selections out there at bigger prices that I'm putting up. And finally, I round out my card with Frederic LaCroix. And I have to admit that at 130-1, I didn't think I'd see too many people on Freddie LaCroix this week. But before I put on this show, I had a bit of a listen back to the DP World show that Skylar Hoke and Tom Jacobs put together on the Mayo Media Network. And it does come across like I'm copying these guys' homework, but I'm hoping it's great minds think alike. Right? Don't get me wrong, I have put all the work in today to land upon my selections. I listened to a couple of competitors, if you like, or colleagues or friends in the industry before I came on, and thought to myself, this just looks like a boy copying the homework. Mark Hill sitting up late here. He's just cutting corners. But no, I have to admit that despite the fact that both those guys landed on Julien Brun, and the fact that Tom put up Adrian Meronk, and the fact that Skylar put up Podrick Harrington, and then that Tom looped back and also put up Freddie LaCroix, I did not copy those boys' homework, but I have to say I hope we have a mutual winner amongst us this week. LaCroix made it down to my final 20 in terms of the number of filters that I worked through in the model metrics, and it's a price at 130-1 that I have to have a little bit of a nibble on. And even at that, I have to say as well, best price 186-1 on Bet Chris, which would indicate that he's not particularly high on the list of golfers this week for the likes of Rufus Peabody. But I'm going to say that Freddie LaCroix at that price is one that's tickling my fancy. So coupled at the minute, so looking into the number side of things, wasn't lights out on the Paspalum. It's not his particular strength, the putter 2 weeks ago, but was consistent enough that there's some progression there. Coupled with his solid greens and regulation numbers, long enough off the tee in terms of the metric there, it was worth me digging a little bit deeper to see what else I could come in with for Julien Brun. To come off with for Freddie LaCroix, not Julien Brun. So he goes off early enough on Thursday morning. I'm hoping he can catch a hot streak through the front nine. Then there's plenty of scoring opportunities. Capable of shooting low if it does turn into a birdie fest as anticipated. Shot a 64 at the Swiss Challenge, for example, on the Challenge Tour. So he can shoot low. Hopefully can put that missed cut behind him in terms of Abu Dhabi and recapture some of the form that he did show in the first half of the year. Last half of the year. Back in November on the opening 2 days of the Joburg Open. There's enough there to like about his all-round game to suggest he can compete. And in this strength of field, I'm happy to take a stab at the price of 130-1 on Freddie LaCroix. Let's get into the DFS portion then. So 9K range, plenty to like here. Jordan Smith at 10,600, Adrian Meronk at 9,800, and Julien Brun at 9,000 will be my DFS selections. Touched upon all three of them in the betting portion. Well worth a look. My fade's going to be Robert McIntyre, 10,300. I'm like a broken record here. I really don't see how you can justify getting to McIntyre outside of potential low ownership. But I'm hoping, generally speaking, some guys will weigh into DFS this week, have the name recognition there when it comes to Robert McIntyre. But it's impossible for me to get to him whenever you have Wiesberger, Smith, and Langask all over 10k as well. 10,300, that's a big price to play for someone who's shown no semblance of form lately. So I am fading Robert McIntyre at 10,300. 8k range then is three guys that all made my shortlist of 20 golfers this week. Didn't quite get to two of them in terms of the betting side of it, in terms of the outright. So Victor Dubuisson at 8,700, Patrick Harrington 8,600, and Jonas Veerman at 8,400. Like any sort of golf DFS tournament, the 8k range, a lot less golfers to pick from whenever you're trying to whittle it down for the three selections and ultimately the fade. I didn't have any strong feelings in terms of the fade this week, but I did side just about with Jeff Winter as my fade at 8,200. Lacks a bit of distance off the tee, and his general ball striking numbers are not long-term favourable, so that's something I'm going to take on in Jeff Winter, although obviously he did have the win equity in 2021. The 7k range then at the Ras al Khaimah Championship. Callum Shinkwin at 7,700, Christopher Broberg at 7,300, and Freddie LaCroix, as I've touched upon, at 7,300 as well. Again, Shinkwin and Broberg both making that top 20, not quite getting there in terms of outright selections, but I think there's plenty of upside with both potentially. My fade is going to be Matthew Pavon at 7,100. Russ has to be a concern here. It's now over 7 weeks since he played competitively. Did land in the Middle East ahead of these last 2 weeks. All ready to go for the Abu Dhabi Championship, and then was a late withdrawal on the Wednesday night after a positive COVID test. Then put into sort of strict self-isolation that was imposed upon him by local authorities. I'm not convinced that will all play into a solid round of golf this week for Matthew Pavon. Definitely, he's been talked up in the industry as someone who can compete. It's just the rust element that's keeping me off him. So I think it'd be a popular low 7k play, but I'm happy enough to avoid. And the 6k range then, Nino Bertasio at 6,900, Ewan Ferguson at 6,700, and Ricardo Gavia at 6,600. So 6k range in general, I don't really deep dive too heavily into when I'm doing these shows as well. Don't really talk about the guys, so I thought I'd change it up a little bit this week and talk a little bit more about the 6k guys and how I landed on them. So Nino Bertasio, 6,900, decent length off the tee, generally strong approach play. Gained nearly 3.5 strokes on approach last week and graded out 20th in that field. Fleeting moments of good GIR numbers when I was digging into it, most recently on his way to a T5 finish at the Portugal Masters, but in this range, definitely worth a stab. So he has the length, approach play showing good signs, GIR showing some good signs on occasion. So 6,900, I'll have a little go on Nino Bertasio. 6,700 then, Ewan Ferguson, the Scotsman, needs to improve his all-round around the green game. Put it well in Abu Dhabi though 2 weeks ago, so on my radar for that. Top 10 on the Challenge Tour and back-to-back tournaments in Denmark. Not sure we're going to see the win equity there with Ewan Ferguson, but there's an outside shot of a top 20 worth keeping in mind for DFS purposes, certainly in terms of rounding out lineups and that sort of price point of 6,700. And even back in 2019, the Scotsman did finish a third place finish on the European Tour as it was then at the Belgian Knockout, ahead of the likes of the betting favourite here, Bernd Wiesberger. So he can step it up at times. Did relatively well on the Challenge Tour, obviously last year to graduate and get back up onto the DP World Tour. So Ewan Ferguson, 6,700. And my last one in that range at 6,600 is Ricardo Gavia, the Portuguese man. Somewhat surprised to see this Challenge Tour graduate down in the 6k range. He had 5 top 10 finishes in his last 10 outings, including a second in the Challenge Tour Grand Finals. Another one that was putting on pass for him 2 weeks ago, particularly eye-catching on those greens. The rest of his game wasn't firing on all cylinders by any means through weeks 1 and 2 in the Emirates, but if he can pull it all together, and he has shown at times that there are elements to that, the rest of his game. So obviously the putter on the pass for them was a significant positive. But I've gone back into some of the other tournaments and we look at the Dutch Open, for example. He was first in the field off the tee. So if he can sort of string it all together, 6,600 is a nice price point. had a lot of confidence during that hot spell on the Challenge Tour in sort of middle to tail end of 2021. So Ricardo Gavia at 6,600 rounds out my DraftKings selections in the 6K range. And let's finish off the show then with the best bet. We got a winner up last week. We're 1-1 in 2022. We've got to start hitting well above the 50% mark anyway if we're going to be long-term winners here. So my best bet this week is Rasmus Højgaard over his brother Nikolai Højgaard. That's priced at -110. Nikolai coming in at -120 on the other side. 72-hole matchup on DraftKings Sportsbook. So I'm surprised for a start to see Rasmus priced up as the dog in this matchup, given their underlying numbers through the first couple of weeks in the UAE. A little bit of betting 101 here, but you are paying a bit of juice when it comes to playing matchups on DraftKings. I would always say if you have the opportunity to bet at the likes of Pinnacle or Chris or any of the more established originating books, by all means try to do that. But 30-cent lines hung here, so in that case, it's a -110 versus -120. Take the difference, 30-cent line. Typically, you want to be betting into 20-cent lines at most. On this occasion, we're betting into 30-cent lines, but at -110, I'm happy to take the stab on Rasmus Højgaard. I would price it closer to -120, -125 on my numbers. So for me, back-to-back missed cuts for Nikolai. Rasmus, on the other hand, he's showing some green shoots lately, particularly last week, ranked 5th in the field, tee to green. I've seen a lot more people putting up Rasmus outright this week. Bit of brotherly love. I'm going to take on Nikolai and back Rasmus Højgaard at -110. And that is it for this week's DP World Tour show. We are back next week for the Ras al Khaimah Classic, I think it's going to be called. Certainly another iteration here. I don't really say this on the show. In fact, I don't say it at all, but I would appreciate some hits in terms of likes. Subscribe on the podcast network as well. So myself and Garrett have obviously gone off and have our own little show now that you have to subscribe separately to on any of your podcast providers. So look up the DP World Betting and DFS show in that regard. And as I said at the top of the show as well, definitely try to catch Garrett's show this week on the Corn Ferry Tour and the Panama Championship, and obviously our boys DB and Pat on the PGA Tour event. And let's hope that we can keep this hot streak running on the Tour Junkies network. That's it for me this week. Thank you very much for joining me, and let's see some green screens and some winning tickets at the bet window. Thank you very much. Goodbye.